Hello students, let us learn the 7th chapter of your English textbook Honeycomb today, The Invention of Vita Wonk by Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl was born on 13th September 1916 and he died on 23rd November 1990. He was a British novelist, short story writer, poet, screenwriter and a wartime fighter pilot. He served in the Royal Air Force RAF during the Second World War. The Royal Air Force is the aerial warfare force of the United Kingdom. He rose to popularity as a writer in 1940s with works published for children and for adults, and he became one of the world's best-selling writers. His works for children include James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, The Witches, Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Twists, The BFG, and George's Marvelous Medicine. And talking about this story, The Invention of Vita Wonk, this is an extract from Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. In this story, an inventor whose name was Willy Wonka invented a medicine named Wonka Vitae, which made people younger. However, his invention turned out to be a failure because it made a very young man go into minus age when he took the medicine. When he took the medicine, he became minus 85, meaning that he had to wait for another 85 years to be reborn. Hence, it was concluded that the product was too strong, it could not make people younger, instead, it made people disappear. So, Willy Wonka had to invent something else to make people older. Wonka White made people younger or made people disappear. Now, he had to make a medicine that made people older. After working day and night, he came up with a new invention. In this story, Willy Wonka explains how he invented Vita Wonk, a medicine that made people older. But before we get into the chapter, let me ask you one question. What is the difference between discovery and invention? Discovery is finding out something that already exists, which nobody has found yet. But invention is creating something new. Now, let us get into the chapter, The Invention of Vita Wonk. Mr. Wonka said, so once again I rolled up my sleeves and set to work. Once again I squeezed my brain, searching for the new recipe. I had to create age to make people old, older, oldest. Haha, I cried, for now the ideas were beginning to come. What is the oldest living thing in the world? What lives longer than anything else? Mr. Wonka had failed to make people younger in his first effort because his medicine Wonka Vitae was too strong that the age of the people went minus. So he had to find out a medicine that made people old, older and oldest. And Mr. Wonka said, once again he rolled up his sleeves and he was set to work. He was well prepared for another try. Once again he squeezed his brain. He gave pressure to his brain to get new ideas. He had tried his best to think of a brand new recipe. And so he first thought what he wanted to invent. He wanted to invent something which would create age. That meant he had to make people old, older and oldest. And finally he cried out of joy as he had started getting ideas for the new recipe. He then thought of two questions whose answers would help him in his invention of a medicine that could create age. The two questions were, what was the oldest thing in the world and what lived longer than anything else? If he gets answer to these questions, he could make his medicine. A tree, Charlie said. Right you are, Charlie, but what kind of a tree? Not the Douglas fir, not the oak, not the cedar. No, my boy. It is a tree called the bristlecorn pine that grows upon the slopes of Wheeler Peak in Nevada, USA. You can find bristlecorn pines on Wheeler Peak today that are over 4,000 years old. That is fact, Charlie. Ask any dendrochronologist you like. And look that word up in the dictionary when you get home. Will you please? So that started me off. I jumped into the great glass elevator and rushed all over the world collecting special items from the oldest living things. Upon hearing these two questions, Charlie, the little boy who helped him, had an answer. The answer was a tree. A tree was the oldest living thing in the world, and it could live longer than anything else, said Charlie, his supporter, his helper. Mr. Wonga agreed to Charlie's opinion, and he said Charlie was right. And then he asked Charlie what kind of tree was required. All trees won't live longer than anything else. He told him that the correct type of tree wasn't the Douglas fir or the oak or the cedar. He said that a pine tree, not any pine tree, a bristlecone pine tree, was the correct one that lived longer than anything else. This specific tree, the bristlecone pine tree, grew on Wheeler Peak. Wheeler Peak is the highest natural point in the USA, and those trees were over 4,000 years old. Mr. Wonga told Charlie that it was a fact that there are trees which are as old as 4,000 years old. If he had any doubt regarding that, he could ask any dendrochronologist regarding that. Who is a dendrochronologist? A dendrochronologist is a scientist who studies the rings that appear each year in the trunks of trees, which is used as a way of calculating the age of trees. Mr. Wonga said if Charlie was not satisfied with the answer from the dendrochronologist, he said he could look up the meaning of the word in a dictionary. The dictionary would give him the meaning of that word, he said. And then he jumped into the great glass elevator and rushed all over the world for collecting the oldest living thing on the earth. The glass elevator is a flying machine. It took him all over the world. A pint of sap from a 4,000-year-old bristlecone pine, the toenail clippings from a 160-year-old Russian farmer called Petrovich Grigorovich, an egg laid by a 200-year-old tortoise belonging to the king of Tonga, the tail of a 51-year-old horse in Arabia, the whiskers of a 36-year-old cat called crumpets, an old flea which had lived on crumpets for 36 years, the tail of a 207-year-old giant rat from Tibet, the black teeth of a 97-year-old grimalkin living in a cave on Mount Popocatépetl, the knuckle bones of a 700-year-old Catalu from Peru. Mr. Wonga went around the world in his great glass elevator, finding all the ingredients for his recipe. And this was the list of items which contained all the things he had to collect in order to create Vita Wonk. There was a total of 9 items which were scattered all around the world. He went around the world in his glass elevator to collect all these items. All over the world, Charlie, Mr. Wonga went on, I tracked down very old and ancient animals and took an important little bit of something from each one of them. A hair or an eyebrow, or sometimes it was no more than an ounce or 2 of the jam scraped from between its toes while it was sleeping. Mr. Wonka continued his story. He told Charlie that he had searched everywhere for very old and ancient living beings which were located in different parts of the world. He had taken a little bit of something from each of them which was important for the making of his new product. That little bit of something that he collected from different things that lived longer than anything was either a hair or a part of an eyebrow or even an ounce or 2 of the jam between the toes of the living being which was taken while it was sleeping. I tracked down the whistle pig, the bobolink, the scroc, the polyfrog, the giant curlicue, the stinging slug, and the venomous squircle who can spit poison right into your eye from 50 yards away. But there is no time to tell you about them all now, Charlie. Let me just say quickly that in the end, after lots of boiling and bubbling and mixing and testing in my inventing room, I produced one tiny cupful of oily black liquid and gave 4 drops of it to a brave 20-year-old Oompa Loompa volunteer to see what happened. Finally, Mr. Wonga had succeeded in getting the whistle pig, the brocklink, the scroc, the polyfrog, the giant curlicue, the stinging slug, and the venomous squircle. The venomous squircle, Mr. Wonga added, could spit poison right into a person's eye from 50 yards away. However, Mr. Wonga said that he didn't have time to tell all the story about his collection of all these things, the details of the recipe, all those he didn't have time to tell all this. He concluded saying that after loads of boiling and bubbling and mixing and testing in his inventing room, he had been able to produce only a small cup of Vita Wonk, which was an oily black liquid. He gave only 4 drops of the liquid to 20-year-old Oompa Loompa volunteer whom he considered to be very brave because anything could have happened to Oompa Loompa. Even he didn't know how the medicine was going to affect Oompa Loompa. The worst possibility was that Oompa Loompa could die. But even then, he volunteered, which was a bold and a brave move from Oompa Loompa. After giving this medicine to Oompa Loompa, Wonga waited to see the results. What did happen? Charlie asked. It was fantastic, cried Mr. Wonga. The moment he swallowed it, he began wrinkling and shriveling up all over, and his hair started dropping off, and his teeth started falling out, and before I knew it, he had suddenly become an old fellow of 75. And thus, my dear Charlie, was Vita Wonk invented. Charlie was so excited to know the result of the experiment, and he asked Mr. Wonga what had happened, what were the results of that medicine. He could not control his excitement, and he did not want to wait too long to know what had happened when Oompa Loompa took that medicine. So he eagerly asked Mr. Wonga what was the result of his experiment. With great excitement, Mr. Wonga said it was fantastic. He told Charlie that the moment Oompa Loompa swallowed the oily black liquid, he started getting wrinkles on his face, and he gradually grew into an old man. Wrinkles began to appear all over his body. His hair started falling and his teeth fell out. Soon he became an old fellow of 75 years, meaning that his age had gone from 20 to 75. Hence, the result was positive and successful. That's how Vita Wonk was invented. That's all the chapter. Now read the chapter, The Invention of Vita Wonk, in a textbook and answer all the questions given under the heading Comprehension Check, and send that answers to my WhatsApp number before 5 p.m. today. Thank you for watching.